Hello, hello, welcome back. Thank you for joining me today. We are going to be talking about one of the more forgettable Final Fantasy games. And I say forgettable because it just doesn't really stick out from the rest of the Final Fantasy series. This is not to say it was a bad game by any means. I actually really enjoyed it, but it's just not really anyone's favorite, at least whoever I talk to. No one ever says, yeah, I love Final Fantasy V. But regardless, we are talking about Final Fantasy V today. I like Final Fantasy V for the class system that it kind of updated from Final Fantasy III. I like that it has the main character's name as Bart. Of course, if they kept with the original Japanese version, it would have been Butts, which to me would have been 10 times better and more memorable. But regardless, it still has a lot of good things going for it. The job system is kind of interesting because you kind of earn the job system throughout the game by finding different crystal shards. And this is exactly what brings us to this battle today. Gogo, and I did mix up this game with Final Fantasy VI because Gogo is a secret character you can get in Final Fantasy VI. So in my head, I was thinking this was Final Fantasy VI all the time. But of course, this is 5. And you fight Gogo as an optional boss to get his ability Mimic. And you don't, of course, have to do this, but if you do fight him, it's an interesting riddle that he makes you do. Instead of fighting him traditionally, he straight up tells you he will mimic everything you do to him, and he will hit back harder. And it's a very hard boss if you do it that way. Or it's the easiest boss, and this is why it's always stuck out to me, because it really is that Taoist trait of do what Nana do, Wu Wei, as it's called. But most people just translate it to doing nothing, which I kind of translated my own way as saying staying relaxed and calm. But everyone has their own kind of interpretation of it. In this game, though, it literally means to do nothing. Very reminiscent of Final Fantasy IV's Paladin scene, where Cecil becomes a Paladin by fighting his darker side. And if you see my first video on this channel, I talk more about that. But this is kind of like a step up from that, I would say, because instead of healing yourself, you literally just do nothing if you take what Gogo says literally. And it reminded me of 2 verses from 2 different Taoist texts. One, the Tao Te Ching, of course, and then the other one is the Art of War. First, we'll do the Art of War one, because I think this quote really does stand out. Tactics of war work like water. As water flows down from a high ground, it seeks the low ground. As victorious soldiers retreat from an enemy's strength, they seek an enemy's weakness to exploit. As water must learn to follow the path of the earth it flows through, so too must soldiers learn to follow the path of the enemy they wish to defeat. War does not repeat itself. It is not the same thing every time. Adapting to your enemy's movements and waiting for your moment to win. This is how a sage fights. And I think this is definitely reminiscent of this battle, because if you don't adapt to Gogo, he will defeat you. So this is one of those understanding your enemy, taking them seriously, and knowing that if you study your enemy instead of just, assuming that you'll win against them like you do every other battle, you will lose this fight. And then the other verse that comes to mind, verse 69 from the Tao Te Ching. A master of war once said, I never host a battle, but rather be a guest to one. I never advance an inch, but rather draw back a whole foot. In other words, defend and counter instead of relying on attacks. Let your withdrawals trick your enemies to advance. Counter your enemies while staying relaxed. Defeat your enemy before they even think of defense. No mistake is greater than underestimating your enemy. This includes overestimating yourself if you attack too frequently. Underestimating your enemies will help them trick you instead, and they'll defeat you immediately before you realize you're dead. Thus, when 2 forces are both evenly matched, it is those who respect their opponents who will win in combat. And again, this I think goes very well with this battle, because all about listening to your opponent, listening to what Gogo tells you, respecting what he's saying. Otherwise, you will lose. Even if you do survive all of his attacks, even though he does hit harder, if you somehow manage to keep the fight going, he will ultimately defeat you with like a really powerful attack. I forgot what it was, but it's like Meteo for Final Fantasy 4 or Ultima for Final Fantasy 6. It's very powerful, and you just die. And I know technically you can win against Gogo if you do it the hard way. He just kind of like pretty much puts you down and said, "Have you no artistry?" or something like that. And you can win by brute force and really good tactics, but you're not supposed to win that way. You're also under a time limit, which is very telling because you're underwater. You have about 7 minutes to hold your breath, as Bart says. Um, and I think that's definitely part of the pressure. You know you're on time limit. You want to do something, and that I think is reminiscent of real life. You're always feeling like you're under pressure. You always feel like you have to do and do and do. And this tells you to not do anything, to like be patient. Even when you see the clock running out, you still stay calm and you win the fight by maintaining your composure even while under pressure. In this case, the time limit. So I think this game really does teach you a lot. It taught me a lot, and it's always stayed with me for that reason. Staying calm under pressure, all those things that we still try to do in life. And going back to, the application of Taoism, it's not really something you see automatically. Sometimes you really have to see the moment for what it is. And, of course it says your enemy. It doesn't necessarily mean your enemy. Just anyone you come to contact with, you are going to have to respect them. If you don't respect them, you create an enemy of them. But if you really do seek to respect them, I think that's what it's really saying here is you're not seeing them as enemy anymore. You see them as a person. And when you see people as who they are, rather than as an opponent, rather than as something that you want to defeat, that's when you really will win, quote unquote. When you really will have the chance for victory because you are seeking to understand, not to win. And when you lose your respect for your opponent, then you will lose. If you respect your opponent, you will win. Because it's not about winning, it's about respect. And I think that's exactly what it's saying here. By not doing anything, meaning by not trying to win, you will win. I think that's what it comes down to. At least that's what I learned from this. So thank you for your time. I hope Final Fantasy 5 has taught you as much as it has taught me. You take care.